Hi, I'm Arlene McIntyre, Creative Director at Ventura Design, and you're listening to Shut the Front Door, a light-hearted podcast that will bring you through the front door and into the homes of influential and interesting people. Home for me is one of the most important things in my life. My career has fortunately given me the opportunity to work closely with people and to help them create a home they will cherish forever. Today we are delighted to be joined on Shut the Front Door by the legend that is Professor Luke O'Neill. Luke is one of the world's most influential scientists, an immunologist and the chair of biochemistry at Trinity College. Luke has been a leading voice during the pandemic, both at home and abroad, sharing immense expert insight and positivity during this difficult time. In September of last year, he was named Science Communicator of the Year for his work during COVID-19 pandemic. I think we can all agree that he has been one of the few people that has kept us going over the last 12 months. Luke is also the author of 3 fantastic books, has a weekly slot on the Pat Kenny Show on Newstalk, and has made contributions to many global media outlets during the pandemic, including Sky News, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. Luke, thank you so much for joining me today on Shut the Front Door.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ollie. Very happy to be here.
I can't even begin to imagine how busy you are at the moment.
Yes, every day, as we were just saying before we came on, every day brings a new set of challenges, I guess. But such are the times we live in, mind you. I suppose it's the story that never ends, it seems, isn't it? And it's funny. And I guess for a lay audience, they must be scratching their heads, wondering what is going on, because it does keep changing, doesn't it?
It does. And I mean, the AstraZeneca was a huge curveball, no doubt, for you.
Well, that was amazing on Sunday, yeah, when we hear the Irish were not going to use that vaccine. My heart sank, to be honest, because I knew a lot about that vaccine. We know it's very safe and very efficacious. It's been in 17 million people. And then we had this emerge, so I think it's a bit unfortunate. I'm pretty confident it'll be reinstated, though. I think it should be fine,
Yes. And what is it they're actually saying? Is it the AstraZeneca that they're worried is causing blood clots, or is it a side effect, or what exactly is?
I mean, it's good. On the one hand, it's good because whenever a new vaccine is rolled out, that's the phrase "roll out" that we use all the bloody time now, isn't it? So the rolling out of this vaccine, they watch for safety signals all the time. They're very careful, And then there were reports of blood clotting happening, you see. And then the Norwegians said there was 4 cases initially, 1 person died. Now, this is all good because you want to report any consequences. The EMA then, who are our key governing body, if you will, they said, yeah, we look at that now and we'll get back to you, And then countries begin to stop using the vaccine. So I think it was premature. They should wait for the EMA to say what they make of it all, and then decide what to do, you see. So it's just a little bit unfortunate. And I guess there's various reasons for this. There's vaccine caution. There's sort of AstraZeneca must be said didn't cover themselves in glory early on, So it's kind of understandable, but I think it's a mistake because this virus is extremely dangerous still, The risk from the virus far exceeds any risk from the vaccine.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very scary. And of course, everyone just wants to get their lives back to normal. So it's just so two-folded, the mental health and then the fear of COVID and contacting it. And it's just dreadful. The whole thing.
Yeah. And I wondered did they even think about that early when they made the announcement, because people are absolutely in bits, for all kinds of reasons. And now here's a vaccine being withdrawn. And even worse, it's been in about 100,000 people in Ireland, So I just think it was a little bit hasty. Let's put it that way, And they might regret it. You never know.
Yeah, the panic. It has actually caused panic. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I have loads of questions for you today, Luke, and I'd love to start with my first question to you, which is, can you share your earliest memories of your childhood home with me, please?
Good Lord, I wasn't expecting that one. That's a good one, yeah. my earliest memory was sitting in my grandmother's garden in Bray, County Wicklow, with geraniums. I can still smell them. I think I was about 3 years of age, and I always vividly remember the smell and the sun. So there you have it. I reckon that's my first memory, sitting on the grass.
Yeah. And what posters then did you have on your teenage walls?
Oh, now I'm glad you've asked me that. Loads of posters. Yeah, I was a big man for the posters. Some people have no posters, right? But some have loads. Well, I had a whole wall of the Beatles because I'm a huge Beatles fan.
Wow.
So that was one big collage that I made myself, And then I had an interesting one. I had when I was like 8 years of age, one of my uncles gave me as a gift a collection of all the posters of the Olympic Games, that we used to advertise them. So I had several of those pinned on the wall. Like I can still remember 1932 was Los Angeles, for instance, So I had various posters from the Olympics. They were the two things out on the wall.
Exciting. So at what point did you realize you wanted to be a scientist?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, when I was in school, I liked science, obviously, as a young
Hmm.
boy. I suppose I was always reading science books and stuff, but no more than other things. I was interested in English literature and history as well, you know. But then I think a really inspirational teacher. Inevitably, many of us would say that when I was in fifth year in school in Presbray, we had a great biology teacher. His name was Fran Mooney, and he was really cool. He had kind of long hair, you know, and torn jeans. That appealed to me, you know. And then he was a great teacher. I remember vividly, Arlene, he told me about this thing called DNA, and that really got me, you know. But having said that, it still took a few years to do it as a career. You know, that was in university when the bug finally bit in my final year. Actually, when I was doing a project on Crohn's disease, this inflammatory bowel disease, and that got me, you know. And I figured, oh, I'll be an immunologist because I want to understand more about that disease and maybe find out things that could be useful. So I guess like most of us, it was a journey that built up along the way.
Yeah. And then tell me about your years studying in Trinity. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, oh, that was fantastic. Yeah, so I came in like 17 years of age. Can you believe it? In those days,
Wow.
no transition year. I was
Hmm.
effectively a child. Opened up this whole world, you know. Actually,
Wow.
funny you asked me that yesterday. I had a memory of it. So when
Mm.
I was in first year, way back then, the students' union gave us a book about drugs, right? And it was
Hmm.
all what they were, the different types, warnings and guidance. And that was pretty radical back then, you know, that you would get that information. And I guess it was a very pragmatic response from the student union. So the kids are going to be taking drugs, so we might as well inform them and try to help them. You know, that was a real memory. But the
Yeah.
big thing for me was as I began to get more into biochemistry then, but say in third year, fourth year, the staff really inspired me. I think a lot of this, as we all agree, is it's inspirational teachers that really make a difference to us in a sense. You know, why we choose what we do is often we're inspired by someone else, you know. And I
Yeah.
was lucky then we had some fantastic staff in Trinity, you know, really teaching us really well. And they really got me going then, you know, in terms of interest in the area.
Wow. You're only 17 though when you look back.
I
It's
know.
incredible, really. You're a baby, really.
Yeah, and that wasn't uncommon. Remember, we all were 17 basically because there
Yeah.
was no many schools didn't do fourth year or transition year. It didn't exist, you know. So
Mm.
many of us were, all my contemporaries were 17, 18 years of age. So that wasn't that unusual.
And so you just lapped it up. You loved it. You loved every minute of it.
Oh, I did. I think I was lucky. I did pick a subject I loved in the end, you know. And that bug really bit in second year, getting more into biology then. You know, I never ever felt I was in the wrong degree, you know. And that was
Yes.
lucky in a way. I mean, because it's a bit random, isn't it? You pick things and you don't know when you're 17, 18
That's
years
so
of age.
true. Yeah, that was my next question for you. Were you ever interested in science? That's what I
No,
always
by
wanted
no
to
means. No, no. I mean, in school, my best subject was English literature. That was my favorite subject in school.
know. Hmm.
And I would have been top of the class in that more than in the sciences, you see. So I was like reading, and that's come round now as a writer. I've got to rediscover that interest, I suppose, in my later
Okay.
years. But no, that was the English literature was a big thing, a big thrill. You know, I think that probably I was in that direction because what got to me about science was it was sort of irrefutable in a way, you know. So science would produce evidence for something, and that was it, you know, and that was the evidence. It was something that was intellectually satisfying, you know, to
Hmm.
learn the evidence for things, and ultimately, I think that's what drew me to it. I've got a vivid memory actually in school, in sixth year, doing an essay on the poet Keats. Now, I quite like Keats, you know, but I got really disillusioned. I said, why am I writing essay number 5 million on Keats? Every schoolboy and schoolgirl had written an essay on Keats, you know. And
Hmm.
I realized, oh, science is different. You can discover something new that nobody's seen before, you know, and that really got to me in university. The fact that you could do research was
Hmm.
really exciting, you know, and that really is what marked it out for me.
Yeah, and it is. It's science is truly phenomenal. There's no question about it. It's not for everyone. I think you need a certain brain, of course, to
I
be able to take it all in.
I don't think so. I think we can all do it, you know?
Yeah.
And you see it in primary school kids. They all love science, you know? They love
Yes,
dinosaurs and astronomy and all that kind of thing, you know? And
that's true.
yeah, it could be the way it's taught, mightn't be the best. And it does take effort, you know, and you do need to be sort of numerate and stuff, maybe. But then I think, no, to be honest, I think everybody has the capacity to do science and understand it, no different to other things.
Wow. And what made you decide to get into immunology specifically?
Yeah, well, as I say, when I was in my final year, like most students, you do a final year project and you really dig deep into, you do a dissertation or a deeper dive on something, you know. And I worked on Crohn's disease, and that's an inflammatory disease of the bowel. And I learned about the immune system, and I learned about the different parts of the immune system. And what really got me was I became pretty clear that we needed to understand a lot more to get new treatments for that kind of disease. So research was needed. And then when I realized you could be a research scientist and go into a lab,
Yeah.
and actually make discoveries, that was really it for me. And then I went to London for my PhD. I went to a very famous inflammation research centre. And then that really then won me over, I suppose. And it was a case then of making discoveries. I guess in my PhD, I might have made one or two quite minor discoveries. And then I was off. Because then you've done it, in the sense that you've done the key thing you're trying to do, and then I was hooked for the rest of my career. Then, really.
Absolutely. I mean, what does all of this newfound fame feel like for you over the past year?
Well, you say that, but I'm not aware of it. I am kind of, but I mean, people do recognize me in the street now. It's a bit unnerving, But luckily, you're in a lockdown. There's nobody out much, you see. So
you're our new hero.
And you can't go to the pub because it's closed, So there aren't too many opportunities to be approached by people. I guess the big difference has been the endless emails and stuff. But again, it doesn't bother me. And people are just so hungry for information, and they're worrying.
Yes. It's
a real privilege actually to be asked and then to try and provide. I answer every single email. Often it's a one-liner, but no, I think the main thing for me would be just to keep on the science and keep focused on what science is trying to deliver here.
Yes, exactly. And have you been media trained, or does just being a good communicator come naturally to you?
Well, I had no training. No, I mean, it begins. Remember, trying to teach a bunch of 18-year-olds biology. You try that, okay?
Wow.
and that's kind of when it began for me, in a way, teaching in Trinity, because I had to teach, I had to lecture, And I must have had a facility for it because I quite enjoyed it, And then remember, as a scientist, you have to communicate all the time. They are communicating with fellow scientists. So it's a bit different. But the same skills apply. Make it interesting, have good slides, whatever it might be, illustrate your point in various ways to get their attention, this kind of thing, So really it's part of what we do. There's nothing unusual in it for scientists to be communicators. I guess the add-on is trying to convey it in a way that people understand when it's quite complicated,
Yeah.
And again, I had that with Pat Kenny. I've been on Newstalk since 2012, you see. So again, I had that background from doing it for all those years, I suppose.
Yes, and I love listening to yourself and Pat together. You really have some pretty interesting discussions, yeah.
The joy, because he's got quite a scientific background himself.
He does.
It makes it easier, so it's an easy conversation with him then. We think the same way, so that makes it easy.
Yeah. When all of this first emerged, Luke, on the news, what was your first reaction?
Well, I mean, it goes back for me now to January 6th. I remember vividly, right? I picked up a science magazine and I saw a single paragraph on a new virus emerging in China, and I remember vividly reading that, going, that's interesting, you see. And then in the third week in January, we had a big conference in Rotterdam, actually, on viruses and the immune system, you see. And there was a SARS expert there. And he says to me, this doesn't look good. I said, oh, God, tell me more, kind of thing. And from that moment on then, it was a precipitous decline, really, wasn't it? Almost day by day, then the news got worse and worse for us. And we didn't see it coming. At worst, we thought it would be like SARS, because it's a similar virus, Now, SARS was containable. Like a few thousand people tragically died, of course, but they could put the fire out quickly with SARS, And our assumption was it would be like that, you see.
Yes.
And of course, we learned pretty quickly it's not like that. It's much more severe in terms of spread. I mean, the key feature that this virus has, the single most malign feature, is it spreads from people with no symptoms. And that single sentence describes how difficult it's been, because that means you couldn't isolate people too easily unless you isolate everybody, Whereas SARS, it was only symptoms that was spreading it, And if that person felt sick, they would stay home or go to hospital or whatever. With this, 3 or 4 days walking around with no symptoms, spreading it, So
terrifying. Absolutely.
A more effective virus in many ways.
Yes. I mean, everyone was clicking on to Contagion. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it exploded, really, the whole thing.
Yeah.
You've always remained so positive, though, during the pandemic, and instilled like loads of hope in people with every interview you give. Like, what's the most important thing to you when you're obviously very aware of your audience and that they're listening to you and they're using you as the one source, if you like, of information on what's really happening. Do you feel a great sense of responsibility with that?
Not really. I mean, that's got more apparent lately, I'd say. I mean, really, but not in the first phase of this, because all I was doing was my job in a way. I mean, people say, "Oh, you're very positive," but that's the way scientists are. Remember, I didn't see anything unusual in that. Like, it wasn't put on in any way because I
Yes.
knew science would deliver. That was always the thing. Now, it did become clear to me as the months began to go by with the level of anxiety out there. You should always try and give the rough with the smooth here, kind of thing, or maybe the smooth with the rough, because people are in such stress about it. So I did make a conscious effort to try to look at the positive aspect of what I was saying.
Yes.
There's always a way out in science. I mean, there might be a crisis. It might be very worrying, but science is at its best when it's looking for solutions, you see. So I've been trying to emphasize, what scientists are doing in this area to address this painful thing, and that became into my mind a bit. But again, I was always a bit that way inclined. I mean, scientists are inclined to be glass half full people because the experiments are often failing, remember? So you got to get back up on the horse again, otherwise you give up. So that's part of our thing, I suppose. And then the other thing was, but more lately, people are even more anxious now with the vaccines, obviously. So I do know I've got to be a bit more measured in my statements to some extent, because I don't want to make things worse for people. I mean, I always felt that I would stop doing it if it was being counterproductive. I'd stop immediately,
Yeah.
Because what's the point? I shouldn't be. The only reason I'm doing it is to try to inform people and help them. So if that became a negative, I wouldn't be doing it, because that goes against the whole reason why I'm doing it in the first place,
Yeah, absolutely. And when did you think we'd be in a lockdown a year later?
No, I didn't, and we're all a bit surprised by that, because I thought by the autumn we'd be in a much better place, and simply because we knew quarantine could work if it was deployed effectively, because you've got a virus that lives in your body for 2 weeks and then it goes, you clear it, So if everybody was locked up for 2 weeks, it would have gone away. And that's what China did, obviously. But given human nature, it wasn't possible to achieve that, really, because people get fed up with being, locked down and so on. So, but I did think we might beat it by the autumn, and then I thought we would have therapies by then. I didn't think we'd have a vaccine. That was the big surprise, that the vaccine came as quickly as it did. But I thought we'd have good therapies to treat it, which we do have, these antibody-based therapies. So that was the vista I was looking at. And then things might have been somewhat normal by the autumn. But then, as we know, it just took off again. And then the second thing that was the asymptomatic spread was the most maligned feature. But secondly, how contagious it is. That only became clear as the months went by, and then these super spreading events became obvious, you see. So that just made the battle much more difficult to win,
Absolutely. And why do you think we've so spectacularly failed in the EU with the distribution of the vaccine?
Well, it is the most disturbing part of the story now, let's face it. I mean, and it's complicated enough, I suppose. I mean, one reason is there's a finite supply with these companies anyway, and the EU has got enough on order. So now it's a question of the companies delivering the vaccine to the EU, and we've seen these various delays and glitches, I guess. It's a bit of a mystery to me why that's happening, you see. And of course, from an Irish point of view, mission one for the government should be to get the vaccine into as many arms as possible. And it should do it in the most effective way that it can. Everything else should be secondary in a way, because it is the way out, no question, you see. So if I was the government, I'd be looking at deals with the Russians and the Chinese for a start,
Yes.
Outside the EU, I'd be using clever mechanisms to get more vaccine in. But it's a running sore, Eileen, I'd say, at this stage. I mean, they need to get a grip of this in the EU,
Yeah.
The latest AstraZeneca development doesn't help us at all. I know that's a really poor development, really, and you can blame people, but it's partly bureaucracy. It's partly 27 countries trying to act together with all these different opinions. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah, it's obviously super duper complicated, and it's not an easy argument. But like Irish airports I just don't think many people don't believe that they're being properly, strongly enough regulated.
Yeah, that's another one that's disturbing for definite.
Yeah.
And then the other one is we didn't get the testing right, But having said all that, I remember now, again, this is a classic O'Neill response coming up. We haven't done that bad in Ireland compared to other European countries. We have saved lots of people's lives in this country. We should be proud of that fact,
Yes.
I think we're in the top third in the league table for performance in terms of protecting our people, and that's something to be proud of. And it is our people who've done that, because the people have tried to observe it. Now, I know there's many, transgressions here and there, of course, but by and large, people have played a blinder, in my opinion, with this, trying to cope with this horrible lockdown that we're in now, so it's something to be proud of.
Yeah, definitely. But why do you think Ireland in particular, with their small population, has struggled the most?
I think it's a couple of reasons. One is Irish people actually are quite decent in their core, on
Mm.
average, and they've stepped up basically to look after each other in the ways that they've been asked to, and that's one thing. There's
Yes,
something about that about Irish
that's
people, I
true.
think. And we've seen decency in Ireland before with many things, like the marriage referendum was a great example of that, in my opinion. That was just a basic human decency thing in the end. Won over all the people who are against it. So that's evidence. We have evidence of Irish people being pretty decent. We're also lucky in that we are on the edge of Europe. We're not Belgium. I mean, Belgium suffered terribly because of the massive traffic through Belgium. So our semi-isolated state, notwithstanding the travel issues that we just mentioned,
Hmm.
cut us a bit of slack as well. So they're probably the two main reasons we've done well.
And what's your view on Sweden? I mean, they've had no lockdown to date in their overall picture. Their death rate has been quite similar to Ireland's. It's
Well,
interesting.
Well, it's interesting. I think in the end, Sweden's like the rest, everybody else in a sense. Now they could have saved a lot more lives. You can't compare it to Ireland. You've got to compare it to other Scandinavian countries. If you're a scientist, you limit the variables. That is the way to put it. There's
Mm.
many differences with Sweden and Ireland. They're much more single household driven. The Swedes, for instance, they socialise less. So, but you would compare it to Finland, and they performed atrociously compared to other Scandinavian countries, and
Hmm.
they know it. I mean, the death rate is much higher than say Denmark or Finland or Norway. And
Hmm.
that's because they didn't lock down. They didn't protect their people, and the evidence for that's pretty clear. Early on, of course, they were held up for the anti-lockdown brigade. Oh, look what Sweden's doing. But the fact is that was far too simplistic an analysis.
Yeah. And what are your views about people who don't want to get vaccinated?
Well, it's a choice. I think it'd be a big mistake to mandate vaccination. It is a human right to choose not to do something like that. And all you can do is try to lay out the evidence. Now I can see a situation though where there's vaccine certificates issued,
Hmm.
and that will happen. The EU have said that. So what do we do in that situation? You shouldn't be excluding people from basic human right things like shops and so on, right? But you might say you can't get on that airplane unless you're vaccinated, and it's not for you; it's to protect others. You see, so that may come in, but it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think there will be debate about how to handle the vaccine situation in terms of those who won't be vaccinated and are refusing it. You see, all you can do, Arlene, is lay out the case for them and hope
Yes.
hope they take it, and some will and some won't.
Yes. We know someone that was on an airplane yesterday going to Italy, and there was someone removed from the airplane because this person was not wearing a mask. Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. There you have it now. You see,
Hmm.
that will happen because you are trying to protect others by someone's behavior, remember, being inappropriate. It's no different than getting the gun out. Not quite, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
That person gets taken off a plane as well because they're endangering others.
But it
So,
was interesting though that it wasn't the airport that took the person off the airplane. The airline.
the airline. Well, they see they've got statutory obligations for their customers,
Hmm.
remember, as well. They've got
It
obligations.
shouldn't have really come to that though. When you think
That's
about
what
it.
you mean. Yeah, yeah. Should have happened before they got on the plane. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a real, can of worms.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is a
Yeah.
can of worms. Yes, these are very difficult questions. I mean, as you
Yeah.
know.
Aren't they?
Yeah, you see, all these issues go away once we get widespread vaccination. That's
Mm,
why that was always going to be the answer to deal with these very complicated, fraught, controversial things. I've
yes.
always felt science will sweep away all that worry and controversy and fighting, and bickering and all
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And that's still the case, by the way. That science will do that. Watch.
And this is a silly question maybe for you, but can you get COVID after you've been vaccinated?
No, well, I mean, there will be a low level of that. Some vaccines fail in people for various reasons. And it
Yes.
could be because your health status isn't great, and there's a number of reasons why these things can happen. But we know from the vaccination trials that these are gangbuster vaccines, the best ever made in some ways. So you would expect the vast majority to be protected by far. And again, the
Hmm.
data in Israel absolutely is bearing that out, because we're
Mm.
seeing a massive drop in the death rate or a massive drop in case numbers,
Hmm.
massive drop in hospitalization. That can only be explained by vaccination
Yeah.
because they've got an unvaccinated group where those things aren't going down.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
again, it's proving the clinical trial basically. Now, when you're in the real world, you see there's more unknowns.
Mm.
Trials are more controlled for all kinds of reasons. So that was the next step in the process. We're waiting to see if the efficacy in the trial is borne out in the real world, and indeed it is almost identical. And that just tells us how powerful those vaccines are.
Yeah, incredible. And Israel, apart from Israel, what other countries do you think have handled this or their whole situation better than others?
Well, the UK are interesting because they made a hames of the initial phase of this
They
and have one
sure
of the
did.
highest death rates in the world, the UK. I
Mm,
mean, I
mm.
think they're third in the world for the death rate. And that's a cause for hanging your head in shame, you see. Now, on the other hand, they are now back in action because of the vaccination campaign.
Yes.
And they got that right. And remember, the UK has some of the best scientists in the world. So they were all devastated by the government's policy response to this pandemic as well, remember. But those scientists have now delivered. They've stepped up and made sure that the way out of this is through science, both through vaccination and therapies. Because remember, people often forget that there's also a great advance in therapies in hospitals. They've halved the death rate in many of these places, just
Yes.
through medical interventions of various kinds. And the UK have led that.
Mm, mm.
Now, apart from that, though, the other countries like South Korea, it was straightforward in a way for them. They got in early with massive testing. If it goes on too long, testing can't solve this because it's too rampant, But there's
Mhm.
other examples of countries that responded very quickly to this and did extremely. New Zealand, there's other examples by cutting off their borders. They're all great responses. I think the ultimate metric here is how many people you've saved in your country. That's the ultimate metric.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
These
Yes.
countries have done very well.
Yeah, true. And I'm not an expert at all, but it just seems like the general death rate is 90% over the age of, say, 84, 85 years of
Yeah,
age.
yeah.
So what would that mean that once everyone over 75 is vaccinated, that the death rate will move closer towards zero?
Precisely. That's the next milestone, right? So in other
Okay.
words, you will once you can predict, and it was easy to predict that. And the modelers, as we call them, they're the ones who predict things. They were predicting that probably 4 or 5 months ago now, I guess. And there was a great prediction in the UK. If they vaccinate the top 4 priority groups, the death rate drops by 90% automatically by that, you see.
Hmm.
And that's what's happening. The death rate is because you don't need to be a mathematician to figure it out. If as you correctly say, I think 99% of deaths are in the over 65. So if you vaccinate that group, of course that death rate will fall hugely, you see. And that's exactly
Yes. Gosh, I remembered. I think I heard you recently saying that if there is an overflow of any vaccines in this north of Ireland, we just need to get it to the south.
snap it up immediately. Which is like,
Definitely.
it should never be about politics or opinion, really. It
Mm.
should just be about pragmatism, you see. And then we know that these vaccines will do that here. So that's the way to think of this. And then remember, the big effect that has is very simple. It gets rid of fear. Now, what I mean by that is fear in all of us as members of this society, but also the government can be less fearful. And that means you can open up again slowly. Now, we will take baby steps, of course. You wouldn't want to go too fast until everybody's vaccinated. You'd be foolish to expose
Yes.
people to the risk in this last phase of this pandemic. So once the fear begins to go away, that changes everything for everybody.
So, what else do we need to watch out for then?
Well, the big thing is these new variants. That's another example of a thing we
Mm.
don't want. So there are these variants. There's 3 of them, as we all know by now. The South African, they're given country names inappropriately, it must be said, but that's the simple way to remember them. So South Africa, Brazil, and UK variants. I mean, they aren't that big of a worry at the moment because we do know the vaccines work to some extent against them. We know the vaccines will certainly prevent severe disease from them. It
Hmm.
might stop you catching them and having a few symptoms. But all vaccines, the mission of all vaccines is not to stop you getting sniffles, remember. It's to stop you ending up in hospital and having severe disease. And
Mm.
that's what these vaccines do. So we are somewhat confident that the vaccines will work against the variants. But then we're not fully sure. And then secondly, there may be extra variants coming. If we don't vaccinate the developing world, that's the really important thing to do next, because or even right now we should be doing it, because new variants might crop up where the virus is running amok. So those are the things to keep thinking about, to watch out for new variants, and secondly, vaccinate the developing world. They're the 2 big things we need to watch in the next few months.
And do you see us jetting off in our flip flop soon?
I do. And well, now
Really?
let's have a few caveats. I mean, I think one likely scenario is now Europe. Let's hope the vaccine campaign works in Europe. Let's start with that.
Hmm.
And we get a good level of vaccination in these vulnerable groups. Let's say by June. Let's put that month on it. And the UK are certainly going to be there by June. Now, what that means is the death rate and rate of hospitalizations and severe disease has now gone down almost to the level of any other infection. So that's dealt with now through vaccination, right? And then if the counts of the virus in the community are low, you can now designate European countries in green zones and allow travel between them. and you will have some kind of vaccine certificate that's more than likely going to allow you to travel, and probably antigen testing before you go when you arrive. That's the protocol that will be introduced. Watch, and then you can go to any of these green countries. So that's flip flop wearing in Spain. Of course, you can try and wear your flip flops in County Kerry if you like, but you know what I mean? I think that's the direction we're headed in. And remember, Aline, we have to have this plan ahead of us.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking for all the time is tell us what the plan is, because we've all been cooped up for months. We're all sick to death of it, you know. So we need, and that plan what I've given you there is there. I mean, we're going to see that articulated more and more watching the coming months.
Is there a global plan put in place? Do you think there's anything really in the pipework that's going to frame this, you know, from happening again in the future? You know, we're better equipped for it.
Oh, definitely. Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you, for crying out loud? If we haven't learned from this, we learn from nothing, given the trauma, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no doubt that WHO are all over that, you know. I mean, the good news from this is we'll be ready for the next one, and that's the experience in Asia. Remember, I mean, those countries responded extremely well because they'd had SARS and MERS, you see, so they were ready with their masks, they were ready with all the testing and everything was in place, you know. So that was great. So you'd hope that if there is another one, and let's not go that far and drive us demented as well.
Totally.
But no, we should be able to respond more quickly. The other sign is we can make a vaccine very quickly now with the same technology that's working against this one, you see. So it's another sign that we get on top of things much more quickly through a new vaccine campaign, you know.
Mm-hmm. So look, if you had to design a response to the pandemic, and with the benefit of hindsight and all that stuff, if you were asked to construct a response to the pandemic as a lab experiment, what would you do different or the same?
Well, if it was... But a good way to put that now is, let's say we get rid of this one. If I can rephrase the question, let's say we get rid of this one and a new one starts. What would we do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we would do is we would immediately protect the vulnerable. That's the first thing. If it's the same, the trouble is it could be a different virus with different properties. Like, what if the next virus infects young people and causes them to get really sick? That'd be horrible, you know. But if it was the same as this one, protect the vulnerable first and foremost, absolutely from day one. Yeah. Sadly, lock them all up. I know it sounds very, very dismissive of them, and we have huge sympathy for them, but you would protect them very quickly. That's the first thing, right? Mm-hmm. Secondly, get the test trace system mobilized very quickly, contact tracing really aggressively to put all the fires out as soon as they start through contact tracing. That's the second thing you'd implement very, very quickly. Of course, you'd mandate the mask wearing and the hand washing quickly as well, you know, and the distancing. You see, obviously, those things would be remind people of all that kind of thing as well, you know, and then get going on the vaccine. That's the protocol if it comes around next time, you know. So what we missed the first time was the rapid testing didn't happen quickly enough. That was and then the second thing that we did miss was we didn't protect some of those nursing homes, you know.
Yes. Or, you know, PPE, I think, was just a total disaster.
Yeah, precisely.
That would have really helped, because there was a real debate on if you needed a mask, if you didn't need a mask. I remember all this unfolding in February, and my husband had been away on business in Bergamo, you know, the epicenter of it all, really, at the time.
Yeah.
And they kind of heard a bit about it on the news when they were there, but they really didn't think much about it.
Right.
I came back on the plane, and it was actually the next morning when he flew back that night, I turned on Sky News. I normally would in the morning if I was making coffee, just have the news in the background. And I heard about this in Bergamo, and I was like, did you hear about it, about this virus? And he said, no. And literally, like, you know, hour by hour, it just snowballed.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just unbelievable. And then it was, should we wear a mask? Shouldn't we wear a mask?
Yep.
You're okay with that one? No, you really need one. It was just so confusing.
That went on for a good few weeks. Now, I was a massive mask advocate early on, and I wrote a big thing in the Sunday Independent quite early saying, look, I'd read the evidence myself, you see, because as a scientist, that's what you do. You look at the evidence. Mm-hmm. And I read some very big papers on this, because remember, that science wasn't clear until they began really looking for evidence, in a sense, you know. So back in February, I would have said, no, there's no need, because the evidence wasn't there, you know. But then they got the evidence. By the end of March, it was crystal clear to all of us scientists that this was the thing to do, you know.
Yeah, I remember the conversations on the radio. It was like the St. Patrick's Day parade was like the biggest thing ever to cancel at the time.
Yeah.
Little did we know, you know, that would just be such a small thing in the bigger scale of things. So, Luke, can I ask you a question? Why has Ireland's construction industry closed during the pandemic when other countries consider construction essential?
Well, that's a great question as well. I suppose I think what happened was the schools and the construction sites were treated the same. They decided to bunch them into one category in a way,
Mm-hmm.
They decided if they closed both of them, that would help the situation. But you're right, though. I mean, one big question we have overall is what's the basis for these decisions?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a scientist, you should say, show me the evidence, really, as to what is behind it. And they didn't do that enough, in my opinion, because that's certainly one way to bring the people with you, is to show the evidence. Now, as I say, we have behaved in a great way, but yeah, there's no evidence of construction sites being sources of infection. So you're right; it's a very strange.
It is nuts. I was in a petrol station this morning, putting diesel into my Jeep, and I am not exaggerating, and it's not the first time I've noticed this, that the petrol station was packed.
Yeah.
There was no one regulating it. There was people from all over Ireland, different wedges outside. It was absolutely bananas inside this petrol station around 11 o'clock in the morning, and I've often seen that. Yes, they're so strict and clamping down on numbers attending funerals, and I just think it's so unfair. Why are they not regulating petrol stations? I mean, they're just fly traps.
There could be a level of pragmatism going on in the sense that we can't control everything. Let's control what we can control and hope for the best. Wing and a prayer type territory to some extent, which is not great either, is it?
No.
We know now so much about the virus, Charlie. Huge knowledge of where this spreads. And it's mainly super spreader events. Did you know 20% of people are responsible for 80% of the spread of it? Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting fact. And it happens indoors.
Interesting.
In closed spaces with no ventilation for a protracted period. That's the main way we spread it from person to person. Wow. Like the evidence that's caught off surfaces is almost gone now. There's hardly any evidence for that,
Mm-hmm.
And that might give rise to a change in guidelines in terms of not only washing all the surfaces. And in fact, we may not even need to wash our hands as much, because if it's not caught off a surface, there's no reason to keep your hands as clean as we did. That hasn't happened yet. But the science is moving in that direction,
Yes. And what vaccine would you like to receive yourself, Luke?
Any one of them. Any one of them, even the Chinese and the Russian ones.
You'll take whatever's coming.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why, because they all protect by 100% against severe disease and death.
Yes.
So that's why I take any of them.
Yes. And do you appreciate the balance between fighting COVID-19 medically and mental health of the population and the whole balance?
Centrally important for the whole thing. I mean, that's something they were counterbalancing often as well, because we live with that for years. The mental health consequences of this disease.
For sure.
So it's got to, and that's why on the 5th of April, they should begin to relax things for that reason.
Let's hope so.
And I would break the 5K rule. I would allow golf and tennis and outdoor sports, because that's a massive de-stressor for people. And again, no evidence of any kind that golf and tennis is spreading the virus.
Yeah.
So I'd be using science. But the disappointing thing is not using enough science to inform this decision making.
Yes. I mean, from my point of view, and from the world that our business is in, our space is very much being on sites and building sites. And it's been really frustrating for us and for our clients, and it has a massive domino effect. I mean, it's just mental health problems all over the place. It's just insane. I just like that. It frustrates me when I was in a petrol shop this morning, and I see how reckless people are. And I have visited sites pre-lockdown, and everyone was so careful.
Yeah,
so it is very seems tough unfair.
Well. I think it's tough on the government slightly as well, because they have to make a call on these things, and they're often acting in a bit of a vacuum with not enough data, so they have to make a judgment. So I think the fact that as we know, like look at the tourist side, the hospitality sector, that's on its knees now. And some of that may never come back. They've got to think of ways to deal with these things you've just been saying, especially certain sectors which are really suffering. I've no doubt they should try to move in the direction. But remember, as I keep saying, and like a broken record, it's the vaccine gets us out of all this. So as soon as we get those counts down,
bring it on,
and then they can start making these decisions in a way that won't, compromise them in a sense. So that's always in the back of my mind.
And what are your views, Luke, on all the recent protests in the city centre?
That's symptomatic of how fed up people are, remember. And you do get this thing called pandemic fatigue. It's well known, actually, in other pandemics. Now, our knowledge of pandemics is mainly in Africa, things like Ebola.
Mm-hmm.
where they've locked down for Ebola, they've locked down for cholera in Africa. After 2 or 3 months, people are sick to death of it, and they begin to behave in a certain way, including protesting and getting out and all that. And then if you combine that with anger, and people are very angry in certain parts of our society for good reason, there are going to be these protests. So we have to expect them. I mean, as long as they're safe in that there's good distancing and mask wearing and all that kind of thing, because that'll just hold us back. If a protest continues to spread of the virus, that helps nobody.
Yes.
And then, of course, if they become violent, that's absolutely horrendous. There should never be violence in these situations.
Not at all. And there is a lot of aggression. Like, for example, what happened to you recently?
Well, absolutely. That's right. Luckily, it's mercifully rare,
My goodness.
But that was a surprise, yeah. And I expect that to happen to me. But I guess you got to expect a bit of it. I mean, this sounds maybe Martin Luther King-ish, but I mean, I have sympathy for people as well,
Of course.
And people are being driven to distraction by this now. And all you can do then really, and it's the government's job, of course, is to keep people steady in a sense.
Yeah, it's not easy. Definitely not easy. I actually pity everyone. I see it. I don't really understand all of it really well. I'm just trying to keep up, I'd say, like a lot of people are.
Yeah.
But I think the overall feeling is I do have great compassion for everyone on all sides. I see.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for the government. I feel sorry for the HSE. I feel sorry for everyone that's in lockdown. It's just a horrendous situation that we're all in.
That's right.
And, everyone's walking on eggshells and trying to do the right thing. So, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
You are, and it has revealed inequalities in our society because, as was predicted at the very start, all pandemics always do that, by the way. It's always the poor who suffer the most in a pandemic,
Yeah.
So, and there is massive division now in a sense because people who haven't worked for a year on the PUP, compare that to someone remote working for Google who have hardly been affected financially anyway,
That's so true.
Their hopes and aspirations haven't really, okay, they want to go on holidays and stuff, but in general terms, there's such a contrast between those two, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is.
And thank God the PUP is there, remember, because you can imagine if that wasn't there.
I know.
It'd be much worse,
And Luke, do you think climate change is a bigger disaster than COVID-19?
Well, that's the big elephant in the room. There's no question. And I saw a great cartoon of a guy looking in a microscope and seeing the virus and going, oh, this is COVID. And behind him is a massive elephant looking at him, this kind of thing. So, well, I mean, that's a real worry for the future. Obviously, it's got to be the next big scientific challenge, of course, is to come up with a solution to this. And again, science will get us out of that mess as well. Watch. But there's no doubt it's a big concern. And all the evidence suggests it's a huge problem that's growing,
Yes. Well, it's just how we cope with it. I mean, what would we do without all you scientists?
Well, the trouble is, you see, we've got but humanity is a funny old thing, isn't it? We have the ability to do certain things and we don't do it, or we ignore it, or we hope it's going to go away. Remember, and that's been a big part of this. A lot of the anger and sort of frustration is party denial. Remember, Yeah. Like, the worst argument you ever had of your life is if someone tells you something that you know is true and you try and deny it,
Yeah.
You defend yourself aggressively. So it's a bit like that in a way,
Yes.
So what's going on as well. The human psychology aspect to this is an extremely important part of it,
Mm-hmm. And do scientists always agree, or do you find you disagree, or?
Well, we disagree a huge amount behind closed doors, remember? Like, what's happened as well, people have seen kind of how science works. Science is not perfect, I mean, scientists sometimes discover stuff that's wrong, or they're overemphasizing certain parts of some study somewhere, But the great thing about science is it eventually reveals the truth, ultimately, But like I'm at conferences and I'm disappointed if someone isn't digging into me saying, I don't believe that bit of data, or I've got different data to you, or have you thought about this, That's part of the scientific process. It's supposed to be combative, if I can use that word, but in a very polite way, remember. It's interesting, this question, I mean, because if a scientific debate becomes aggressive, know what I mean with that is, say, people shouting, then you lose the truth entirely, because it blinkers people's minds and you can't get to the truth if there's the nastiness,
Yes.
And that's why in scientific debate, it's supposed to be always meant to be moderate, because you won't get to the truth otherwise.
Yes.
And things held back. All that scientists want is to get to the truth, remember, and discover something that's real and is useful, So, and the trouble is with this COVID business, once it goes into the Twitter sphere, it becomes nasty, and that doesn't help anybody,
That's for sure. So, Luke, here's the $1 million question. Are you ready?
I am.
If there was no NPHET and there was no government, and it was 100% up to you to decide how to handle the crisis, what would you do?
Oh, now that's a very mean question. Okay, what I would do is I would go on a flight to Mallorca and not come back. Now,
I love it.
well, what would I do? I would invest a huge amount of money. That's the first thing, which is going to be tough. I'd borrow as much money as I can borrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put the money into a few things. Number one, I'd increase the number of public health doctors and nurses by at least fivefold. That's the first thing, right? Because they're the ones who will help us hugely through the next few months, right? And employ them in all kinds of ways in the community, helping people, contact tracing, and ramp that up hugely to make sure we can have a really slick way to contact trace and eliminate the virus through contact tracing. So that's one thing. The second thing I would do is definitely get more vaccine in and deploy it as quickly as I physically can. The fact that Netanyahu had 17 separate meetings with the head of Pfizer in November to convince him to give him 11 million doses, So deals can be done. I'll be pushing for more vaccine from wherever I can get it, is the second thing I would try to do. And then beyond that, then I would just make sure the messaging is really carefully handled,
Mm-hmm.
and mainly to keep people on side, be transparent with them, treat them like adults, explain why it is the construction isn't open, all those sorts of things. I'd be doing that, as well. The information thing should be much more
clear.
effective.
Do you think that's a weak point, the communication?
It's been mixed, definitely, and we all know this, don't we? And it's got slightly better in the last few weeks, I'd say. But there was a period when it was just awful, with all the different ministers appearing in the media saying different things. I mean, that's disastrous,
Totally.
I think the most important thing there is you want to be fully transparent with people. You want to give them the information as best you can, and then you also want to say, this is the way out of this. This is the plan. Because if we feel we're being run around with no leadership and no clear plan, that's the worst thing for human health. Remember, that's the worst thing for mental health, rather. Because that really disturbs you. But the most disturbing thing for mental health is a sense of lack of control. And a sense of we're not going anywhere, a sense of we're stuck and there's all these unknowns. That's extremely stressful for people, you see. So now again, they've done a reasonable job, and I wouldn't be completely negative towards them. But I think, especially in the next 3 to 6 months, that's got to be really good.
Very good. Gosh, let's hope so, because it's just been we've been sitting on a roller coaster with no seatbelts on for the last few weeks.
Exactly, and no mask, as well.
And no masks, exactly. And tell me, do your students want you to give them your autograph in Trinity?
Well, there aren't many in here. You see, they're all working remotely. So I don't see many students.
That's so true. Yes, of course.
I would have the odd when I'm walking down the street.
Mm-hmm.
A request for a selfie here and there, that kind of thing.
Oh, amazing. I love it. I hope you have your face masks on.
Oh, God, I do. That's a little bit of disconcert. And I always say yes. It's always, and it's normally someone like a young person saying, "Oh, my grandmother."
Oh, I know, of course.
Kind of thing, So I'm very happy.
That's so sweet. And do you really look forward to the colleges opening up again, Luke, and being able to? Yeah.
Good God, I think we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
We all want to begin to bring things back again for all the reasons that we know are obvious, but you can't educate students by Zoom. Let's have that for definite. We all need human contact at every level, don't we? So I think that the sooner we can get those back, the better.
I was reading about your incredible story about how you recently sold Inflazone, the company you founded with Professor Matt Cooper. It's incredible. Can you share some of that story with me?
Well, you can imagine what the year has been like for me. I mean, that was happening anyway. It's incredible that's all happened at the same time.
Yeah.
3 buses have come along at once. But that was a great one. So I've been working on them. Now, my main research interest, as I've said before, is inflammatory diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So I've worked on things like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, which actually are inflammatory as well, because your brain gets inflamed and specific parts get destroyed by the inflammatory process, And then, of course, COVID is another inflammatory disease. So I've worked on those for donkey's years, 30 years of effort, really. And then in 2010, I made a discovery in my lab in Trinity, which suggested that we could maybe develop a brand new anti-inflammatory that could have use across multiple diseases. And it targets a specific part of the immune system, which has the name NLRP3. These names are atrocious, but that's what it's called. And that turns out to be a master on switch for inflammation anywhere in the body, Wow. And then we discovered a drug to block it. It's tremendous, And that drug was actually discovered by Pfizer. by coincidence. They're all over the news now. But Pfizer had a big
Fantastic.
inflammation program. And then they kind of dropped it and they couldn't develop it. And we made a better version of the Pfizer drug, actually. And then the big question is, what do you do next? I mean, you need to raise a huge amount of money, Arlene, to do a clinical trial. Like a single trial costs $300 million, for instance, you know.
Oh my God.
You can't get that money off a bank or off venture capital even won't give you that much, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to go to the big drug companies because they've got deep pockets. And so we go on the road, we make presentations. It went on for a year. I must have made 1,000 presentations.
Wow.
I presented to every single drug company in the world, incredibly. And finally, Roche were the one who said, yeah, we love you. We'll take it in, and they bought us there. And that meant money came in for the investors. They'd invested over 50 million, remember, in this company.
Wow.
At risk, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So the money came in, and then we all got a share. I'm not denying I did reasonably well myself, but so did Trinity, because Trinity was a shareholder because it came out of my lab, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, but the big thrill, I mean, there's now 6 clinical trials running for our drugs in Roche. They're doing these diseases. They're just starting, you know. So it's tremendous now because we really will find out if this drug will work for these diseases where there's a massive need, you know.
NLR3P.
NLRP3 is a horrible name, isn't it?
It's very cool.
It was coined by a Swiss guy in Lausanne who I knew very well. He discovered it, actually. And it's very simply, it's a protein in the immune system that goes crazy. That's all it is, really. You know?
Wow. How amazing is that? And then you also published a children's book called The Great Irish Science Book.
I did. That was another thrill. Yeah, that was about 2 years ago now.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
Fueling little minds with knowledge. It's lovely.
Well, they asked me, they said, oh, listen, I'd done a book called Humanology. That was my first book with Gil. Mm-hmm. And that sold quite well, and they liked it, you know. And that was the science of being human. And then they said, what about doing a science book for kids? And I said, that's a bit tricky, you know, because I've never written for that age group before. And they said, oh, look, there's no Irish science book. There's loads of science books for kids, obviously, but there was none with an Irish sort of angle. Now, the Irish angle is all the examples I give are Ireland, you know. So the geology chapter to Giant's Causeway, things like that, you know. And then I mentioned all these Irish scientists. And then, it came out. It was fantastic, to be honest. A great illustrator. Linda Farland was my great compadre. She was brilliant doing all the drawings. You know, it was a real thrill, actually, to see the book come together. So that was a really nice one. And then, it sold well. So Gil were happy.
Excellent.
And I've got a huge reaction, even before COVID. There's experiments in it, you see, for kids sitting in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. So several parents were complaining to me, they wrecked my kitchen. I said, great, you know.
Good, great. And so then also tell me about your band, The Metabolics. Are you guys still gigging on Zoom?
Sadly, it's tough now, no more than anything else. You know, it's been a bit hard. We did get to play, though. We played 4 songs. I did a podcast with Brezzy, right? Mm-hmm. And he got me to play a few songs to put in the podcast in his studio. So the band got back together again for that session. Mm-hmm. And then we played just before Christmas Day, like the 20th of December, the Irish College of General Practitioners. All 2,000 of them had their special Christmas online party, and we played for them. Wasn't that
great? Brilliant.
But we are missing it, actually. And now 2 of the guys in the band are professional musicians, right? We're not stupid. We're not stupid. We bring in 2 good guys to help us. They haven't worked in months, you know. Mm. So they're desperate to do gigs again. So let's hope we can do a gig soon.
So what do you like at home? Tell me a little bit about you. Are you like a super duper organized person? Or are you relaxed at home?
You'd need to come in and have a look. Am I organized? No, I wouldn't say so. No, I do like to loosen up a bit, you know, and stuff like that. So no, I do like to lounge. Let's put it that way, you know. And I do like to hang out and stuff. So, but I quite like a tidy house, I must admit, though. Yeah. Like I can't sit in a room if it's a bit untidy.
Yeah, I'm like that too. I feel more kind of not in control, but I feel once everything is organized around me that I can kind of relax then.
It's a strange trait. It's probably a weakness on both our behalf.
Yeah, probably. Totally. And how did you and Margaret meet each other? I believe she's a scientist as well.
She is indeed, yeah. So she... it's an interesting story. So she's if I dare disclose this, she's slightly older than me, right? Mm-hmm. So I never met her in Trinity. She did biochemistry in Trinity as well. But by the time I had graduated, she'd left, you know. Then she went to Cambridge to do a PhD.
Wow.
and then she went to Australia. No, I didn't know her in this time frame. By
Okay.
the time she was in Australia, I was in Cambridge, so we missed each other. And then I came back to Ireland. I got a job in Trinity as a lecturer, and she had a job back in Ireland, and then we met, so we met in the biochemistry department, actually. Our eyes met across the test tube. Isn't that marvelous?
That's great. I love it. And both your sons are scientists.
They are, yeah, incredibly, yeah. So Stevie, he's doing a PhD. He's doing a PhD in chemistry in Cambridge, which is pretty good. He's following in our footsteps in a way. It's like the family business. It's not unusual for the carpenter's son to become a carpenter, really, I suppose.
Yeah.
My other son, he's doing physics actually in Trinity. He's in third year, so they both went down the science. So they may not stick with it. You never know. But
how cool is that?
My younger son is a big muso now. He's in a band. He writes songs and stuff.
There
So
you go.
maybe he'll go on the musical path.
Yeah, the old apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. There you go. He likes his music.
He does. He loves it. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the influence, isn't it? I suppose of parents. They can't escape our influence in a way,
Yeah. And how would you guys unwind in the evenings?
Yeah, I'd say maybe 2 bottles of wine to get things going.
I love it.
And I'm not exaggerating. We like our tipple now and again. I guess I hate to admit to watching TV. We're all stuck in that loop, aren't we? You can't be a good movie on Netflix, can you? So that's a great way to unwind, I find. And then music. Me and Sam will play together. My son will sometimes jam.
Cool.
To play a bit of music together. So that's another thing we do. My wife is an avid golfer and tennis player, so she's in bits at the moment because, for obvious reasons, there's no golf and tennis, so that's very hard on her because that's her big hobby, really. So she's longing for those things to restart in many ways, and I don't play those at all. So we separate. I have no interest in sport, really, to be honest. So we have our own little lives going as well.
Excellent. And if you guys could go on a family holiday tomorrow, where would it be?
Oh God! Well, now I'd go on a cruise. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Just to go from place to place, and
I've never been on a cruise. What are they like? Cruise ships?
Great. Yeah, we did one actually. Me and Margaret about a year ago.
Yeah.
We went to Alaska. I was in America. I did a sabbatical last year in Stanford for a few months.
Oh.
And then we made the most of that, and I went up to Alaska on a cruise. So it was brilliant. Yeah.
Excellent. I think they could be dangerous, though. I mean, with all the buffets and the open bars, and I just can't even imagine.
When you see footage of, say, Cheltenham races this time last year, your skin falls, doesn't it? You go, oh, God, how can all those people be together?
I know.
And given the outbreaks on cruises, they're going to be a while coming back. I mean, I hear there's several cruises planned in America, and they've been sold out within a minute by people who've been vaccinated.
I know. It's funny now. That is actually so true. When somebody sneezes now, you're kind of like you're noticing.
We do, and it'll take a while to get over that. This will hurt for a while. I think we're all going to be like, we've all been beaten up, basically.
True.
And it's going to take a while to readapt and get, and that'll be another challenge. Watch anyway. When we do reopen, there'll be reluctance, and people will be a bit more recluse, and we've got to get them back out. We've got to try to encourage people back out to go back to the lives they had. That's going to be very important.
And can I ask you a question? And I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. But are you a spiritual person?
I wouldn't use the word spiritual, but I do have a sense of something beyond us. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's interesting.
I wouldn't be I don't believe in a God per se, and I wouldn't be praying and stuff, but to any God. But I do have a sense of something else. Yeah, it's hard to put my finger on it. It could be partly to do with transcendence, is the word I would use. In other words, when I play music, that's a transcendent event. And there's something funny going on there. I can't put my finger on it. You could call it spirituality, maybe is one name for it. But so I am. Yeah, I'm not a complete atheist like many of my scientific friends would be.
Yes, yeah, but there is something out there. Gosh, I didn't actually think you'd say that, but that's an interesting answer.
Yeah. Well, I've got respect for it as well. And I mean, several of my friends who are scientists are very devout.
Yeah.
And I never dismiss it because it's whatever gets you through the night territory.
Yeah, totally. And what have you learned about yourself the most during the lockdown? What have you learned about yourself personally the most during the lockdown?
Good Lord, there's a deep question. Now we have to think about that one for a minute. What have I learned about myself? I think I've learned adaptability in a sense because I used to travel a huge amount,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was on the road a third of the time. Trying to flog the company was one example, but equally visiting universities or conferences. Science is extremely sociable, remember. We go to loads of conferences and I
Yes.
was asked to give loads of talks in conferences and so on. So I was often on the road, And that came to an abrupt halt this time last year, didn't it? And I
Yes.
wasn't sure how I'd cope with that. I thought, geez, I'm at home now all the time, And yet, I think I've probably done all right in the face of that cut in travel. Although I suspect I'm going to break soon. I'll be running for the hills. But I was able to adapt a bit, I suppose. So that's something I learned. And maybe I wasn't quite so confident I would, but I was still able to sort of get by. I guess the big distraction, though, has been all the media stuff. Obviously, that's a new thing in my life.
Yeah.
So that kind of replaced the travel in a way,
And who's inspired you the most in your career?
Oh, in my whole career?
Yes.
You mean in general?
Yes, in general.
I had some, again, great mentors.
Yes, who are they?
In fact, when I was in Cambridge, I worked in Cambridge, you see, after I got my PhD. And my boss there was a guy called Jerry Saclaval. He was a brilliant scientist, with huge exacting standards. So I kind of hopefully learned from him how to be a good scientist, So he was a big inspiration. And then a guy called Charles DiNarillo, who was he's in Colorado, actually, is where he works. He was a huge influence on me. He got me into the whole NLRP3 business ultimately, actually. So the part of inflammation I work on, he was the founding father of that field. And he was always very supportive to all us junior people, So I always mention him as a key influence.
Yeah. And can I ask you, just on a side question, what your feelings were about Bill Gates' prediction at the time?
Well, yes, it was very, very perspicacious, if that's the word, wasn't it? It was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
There were several people predicting this in a way, and we ignored them. I mean, I've got a famous paper, actually, which has done the rounds in immunology from 3 years ago, saying it will be a coronavirus. It will jump from a bat into a human. It will cause a global pandemic.
Jeez.
Like, it's almost like Nostradamus territory,
Wow. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. So that was going on. These predictions we used to just not listen to them and say, oh, don't be ridiculous, kind of thing. It's too random. It's hard to predict that kind of thing. But that's exactly. I mean, these predictions tragically came true.
Absolutely. And then there's all these insane, conspiracy theories. I'm sure you've heard most of them.
Indeed, I have. But they've been kicking around for donkey's years.
And what do you think? Do you think?
Well, again, it's a symptom of the human condition, isn't it? Let's face it, the people are going to be like that,
Yeah.
They're just. But again, the reason why we invented science was to counter that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Science was invented in the 1600s, really, as part of the Enlightenment, as a way to counter stuff that wasn't true, And in other words, here's the evidence. Now, there you have it. You can choose to believe that or not. If it's your choice not to believe it, that's up to you,
Yes.
So the whole job of science is to lay out evidence. And, the famous example we have of that, the Royal Society, which is the world's oldest scientific society, their motto in 1660 is take nobody's word. That's the motto. And that exactly captures what science is about. So if someone has a conspiracy theory, I would say, well, show me the evidence. Now, if they produce it, I've got to change my tune and go, maybe there is something in this,
Yeah.
But the truth is, there's no evidence for all those conspiracy theories.
That's good to know. That's really good to know, especially coming from you, Luke. That's good to know. And like I said at the very beginning, before we started recording, my husband's German, and he really is very careful about who he takes, any kind of news from. And anytime you're on the television, he'll turn up the volume. So that's a huge compliment to you.
That sounds like a huge one. I'm very grateful to
you. This is my final question for you. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't listen to guys in their 50s. No. What would I give as a piece of advice to my younger self? Don't be worrying too much.
Okay.
I think when we're in our 20s, we're very het up, aren't we? And we take things far too seriously, and we worry about our path through life and all those sorts of things, So try not to worry, because everything will work out fine. That'll be the advice I give.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you what's called separately. It's called the quick fire round of questions. Are you ready?
I am. Go on.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Red wine or white wine?
Red.
Staycation or holidays abroad?
Holidays abroad.
Hard copy books or digital?
Oh, hard copy.
Sit-in lectures or online lectures?
Sit-in lectures.
Immunology or biochemistry?
Immunology.
Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson?
Oh, that's controversial now. Both. I'm not going to answer that one because...
Good. Writing or inventing?
Oh, inventing.
Virtue or sin?
Sin.
Electric picnic or Glastonbury?
Oh, electric picnic, my favorite.
Radio or TV?
Radio.
Rock or classic?
Rock.
Glass half empty or glass half full?
Oh, well, it depends on if you're an engineer. There's too much glass for the water. Glass half full, of course.
And my final one is 2021 or 2022?
2021. Let's just keep going.
Keep on rocking forward.
Yeah,
we'll get through this. Well, listen, thank you so very much for being my guest today on Shut the Front Door. And I've absolutely loved chatting to you. And I wish you and your family all the best.
Great. Thanks very much, Elaine. It was very enjoyable. Thanks for it.
You take care.